Sometimes hope begins with something as small as a broken roof in the rain. A tired veteran and his loyal dog stopped by an old lakeside tea house just looking for shelter. They thought it was only a place to rest, but beneath its worn wooden floor, a forgotten promise was waiting to be found. It wasn't treasure or fortune, but something far greater. A reminder that faith, kindness, and second chances still flow like water beneath the surface of this world. Where are you watching from today? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Veteran and the Shepherd for more heartwarming tales of faith and hope. The morning rain drifted softly over Pine Haven, a quiet town resting by the lake. Mist hung low, wrapping the pine trees in silver haze, and the air smelled of wet soil and cedar. The road that curved toward the water glistened like dark glass. A rusty pickup truck rolled slowly down that road, wipers squeaking in tired rhythm. Inside sat Ethan Miller, a 48-year-old veteran whose eyes carried the weight of both distance and silence. His face was lean and weathered from years beneath desert suns. A faint scar ran along his right cheek, half hidden by a short beard touched with gray. His brown hair, damp from the leaking roof of the truck, clung to his forehead. Ethan's hands, rough and calloused, gripped the steering wheel as if holding on to what little stability remained in his life. Beside him lay Buddy, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a thick sable coat streaked in black and silver. His ears twitched at every sound outside, and his amber eyes followed the raindrops tracing the window. Loyal, intelligent, and deeply attuned to his owner, Buddy had once been trained for search and rescue before being retired for a leg injury. That limp was faint now, but it gave the dog's stride a certain quiet dignity. They had been on the road for weeks since Ethan lost his job at a local lumber mill. The layoffs had hit everyone hard, but for a man like Ethan, who still woke some nights hearing echoes of distant gunfire, it cut deeper. He lived day to day, fixing fences, stacking firewood, doing whatever odd jobs small towns could spare. Yet work had grown scarce, and his savings were down to a few crumpled bills and coins in a glove compartment. As the rain thickened, Buddy whined softly, restless. Ethan glanced at him and managed a tired smile. "Yeah, I know, boy. We'll stop soon." Ahead, through the mist, a faint yellow glow appeared, a light hanging from an old wooden sign that swayed in the wind. The carved letters read, "The Dawson Tea House." He pulled over, engine sputtering to a stop. The building sat near the lake's edge, its faded blue paint peeled by time. Steam fogged the small windows, and smoke rose from a chimney that looked too fragile to hold another storm. Ethan stepped out, pulling his jacket tight, and the rain immediately clung to his hair and beard. Buddy jumped down beside him, paws splashing in the puddles. Together they walked up the short steps beneath the awning, where an old brass bell hung beside the door. When Ethan pushed it open, the bell chimed softly. Inside was warm, dim, and filled with the scent of tea leaves, honey, and something older, wood, paper, and stories. Behind the counter stood Eleanor Dawson, a woman in her late 60s, tall but slightly stooped from years of tending the shop. Her silver hair was tied in a low bun, and she wore a long brown cardigan over a faded green dress. Her face, lined but gentle, carried that particular calm found in people who had already endured life's storms. Her gray eyes lifted with mild surprise when she saw the strangers at her door. "Well now," she said in a voice that carried the warmth of the hearth. Not many travelers stop here these days. Come in before you both turn to icicles. Ethan nodded politely, removing his cap. Sorry to intrude, ma'am. Just needed a roof till the rain lets up. Then you found the right one, she said. Have a seat. I'll put the kettle on. Ethan led Buddy to a corner table near the window. The dog lay down, his head on his paws, watching the room with patient alertness. The tea house was small but full of character. Wooden shelves lined with jars labeled in neat cursive. Chamomile, oolong, jasmine, peppermint. Each jar seemed to hold a memory rather than a flavor. Mrs. Dawson returned with a tray, setting down 2 cups of steaming tea and a plate of biscuits. You've got a fine companion, she said, glancing at Buddy. He's well trained. Smarter than most people I know, Ethan said with a faint chuckle. She smiled. My late husband used to say that about our shepherd, too. He was a soldier like you, I think. Ethan looked up, surprised. You can tell? The way you sit, always facing the door, she said softly. Men who've seen war never stop listening for what might come next. He didn't answer right away. His fingers tightened around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into his hands. Your husband served? Yes. Korea. Came back, but not the same. Built this place to find peace, to give the other veterans somewhere to sit and breathe. Her eyes drifted to the window. For a while it worked. Ethan followed her gaze. Outside, rain slid down the glass like tears. And now? Now it's just me, she said simply. And this old place that the bank says isn't worth keeping. Ethan frowned. You're losing it? She nodded. Next month, unless I can pay the taxes. But time's got its way of taking more than money, doesn't it? He looked around the room again. The shelves, the cups, the faded photos on the wall showing groups of men in uniform raising teacups together. Feels like this place means more than just tea. Mrs. Dawson smiled faintly. It does. But the world's forgotten how to sit still long enough to taste it. As thunder rolled outside, a dripping sound echoed from above. Ethan glanced up and saw water sliding from a loose board in the ceiling. Without thinking, he stood. You've got a leak there. Been there since last winter. I keep meaning to fix it, but Ladders and I don't get along anymore, she said with a small laugh. Ethan rolled up his sleeves. I can take a look. Minutes later, he climbed into the attic, guided by a flickering lantern. The roof groaned under the rain. Buddy followed halfway up the stairs, whining softly, unwilling to let his master out of sight. Ethan pressed a plank over the dripping gap, securing it with an old nail he found in a tin box. By the time he climbed back down, his hands were scratched and wet, but the leak had stopped. Mrs. Dawson watched him, eyes bright. You didn't have to do that. Ethan shrugged. Habit. I fixed worse under fire. Then I owe you a cup on the house, she said warmly. Buddy wagged his tail as if agreeing. Ethan sat again, accepting the fresh cup she poured. Steam curled upward, fragrant and calming. For a moment, the weight on his shoulders seemed lighter. Mrs. Dawson sat across from him. You from around here? Just passing through, he said. Been chasing work since the mill shut down. You'll find it hard this season, she said gently. But maybe you're meant to stop running for a bit. He gave a faint smile. Stopping's never been my strong suit. Maybe that's what this rain is for, she murmured. To make you wait long enough to see what's still worth saving. Outside, the storm eased. The sound of water dripping from the roof blended with the soft hiss of the kettle. Ethan looked toward Buddy, who had lifted his head, ears pricked toward the floor. The dog gave 3 short breaths, quiet, deliberate. Ethan frowned. "What is it, boy?" Buddy stood, sniffed near the wooden boards under the counter, then whined once more. Mrs. Dawson tilted her head. "He always do that?" "Only when something catches his scent," Ethan said, kneeling beside the dog. He pressed his hand to the floorboard. It felt slightly damp, cooler than the rest. "Old plumbing, maybe," Mrs. Dawson offered. "But that part of the floor's been sealed since before my husband passed." Ethan met her eyes, curiosity flickering. Then maybe something's still beneath it. The rain had stopped entirely now. Through the window, the lake shimmered faintly under a break in the clouds. Ethan sat back, lost in thought. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about what he'd lost, but about what might still be found. Mrs. Dawson poured them both one last cup of tea. "You know," she said, voice soft but sure, "sometimes people don't just walk into our lives. Sometimes they're sent." Ethan looked at her, unsure what to say. Buddy lay down again, tail thumping once against the floor. Outside, a single ray of sunlight broke through the gray sky, landing squarely on the teahouse sign. It shimmered faintly, as though the name itself had exhaled after a long silence. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Miller allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he had found a place that would let him stay. The next morning broke pale and quiet, the rain reduced to a thin mist that clung to the window panes of the Dawson teahouse. The air inside smelled faintly of damp wood and honeyed tea leaves. Ethan woke early, stretching his sore shoulders after a night spent on the small bench near the stove. Buddy was already up, lying alert by the doorway, his amber eyes following every movement of his master. Ethan looked around the small shop and saw Mrs. Dawson at the counter, pouring hot water into a chipped teapot. The lines on her face were sharper in the morning light, her hands trembling slightly as she worked. "You're up early," Ethan said, running a hand through his messy brown hair. "Couldn't sleep much," she replied softly. "The doctor says I should take it easy, but the bills don't stop coming just because the heart slows down." She smiled faintly to cover the weakness in her voice. Ethan frowned. "You've got heart trouble?" She nodded, avoiding his eyes. "Been a few years now. The medicine helps, but it's not cheap. I was planning to sell the place before winter, pay off the taxes, and move in with my sister in Maine." He didn't know what to say. Something in him tightened at the thought of this gentle woman leaving the one place that still felt alive. Buddy shifted closer to him, sensing his unease. To change the subject, Ethan offered to tidy the shelves. "Let me help out. Can't stand sitting still anyway." Mrs. Dawson didn't argue. She handed him a worn rag and gestured to the rows of dusty jars. As he worked, the quiet filled the room. Only the sound of Buddy's paws against the wood floor broke the silence. Every few minutes, Mrs. Dawson would hum under her breath, a slow tune that seemed older than the shop itself. Around mid-morning, Buddy stopped suddenly near the counter. His tail stiffened, and he sniffed the base of the old cabinet. Ethan noticed the dog's ears perk and the low rumble in his throat, a signal he had come to trust. "What is it, boy?" Buddy nosed at the corner where the wooden boards met. One section sounded hollow when Ethan tapped it. Kneeling down, he pressed his hand against the seam and found a thin gap hidden behind years of dust. "You've got a loose panel here," he said. Mrs. Dawson walked over, curious. "That's strange. I've been here nearly 30 years and never noticed it. Ethan pried gently at the edge until the panel came free. Behind it was a small wooden compartment no bigger than a shoebox. Inside lay a few yellowed papers wrapped in twine and a metal object that caught the light. It was a brass key, small and ornate, shaped like a maple leaf with the letters PH7 engraved on its side. Mrs. Dawson covered her mouth with a trembling hand. "Oh my, that was my husband's handwriting." She sat down slowly, the color draining from her cheeks. Ethan helped her steady herself, worry etched on his face. She unfolded the papers with care. The top sheet was a letter, written in firm strokes that had faded with time. Ethan read quietly over her shoulder. "My dearest Eleanor," the letter began. "If you ever find this, it means the lake's voice has gone quiet. Beneath our floor runs the old spring line, the water that gives life to this place. Guard it well, for it carries more than minerals. It carries memory. Should it ever fade, let someone who listens, not just hears, find it again. The key will lead them." Her husband, Thomas Dawson, had once been a civil engineer who designed water systems for rural towns before joining a veterans foundation after the war. His passion for water and how it connected people had inspired him to build the teahouse above the natural spring that fed the lake. Eleanor's eyes glistened as she read the final line aloud. "If the day comes when you can no longer keep this house, leave it not to the highest bidder, but to the kind soul who still believes water remembers." Ethan felt the weight of her silence afterward. "He sounds like a good man," he said gently. "The best," she whispered. "He built this place with his own hands after coming back from Korea. Said it was his way of mending things he couldn't fix over there. He passed before telling me much about that spring. I thought it was just a story." Buddy nudged the key with his nose, as if insisting it meant something real. Ethan smiled slightly. "Maybe it's more than a story. Maybe it's why this place still stands." Before Mrs. Dawson could answer, the bell above the door chimed. A woman entered, shaking off the drizzle from her umbrella. She was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with chestnut hair pinned neatly under a wool cap. Her eyes were the color of pale coffee, sharp, observant. She wore a gray trench coat over a dark skirt and carried a leather portfolio. "Good morning, Mrs. Dawson," she said, polite but hurried. "Sorry to drop in unannounced. I'm Margaret Finch from the town records office." Mrs. Dawson looked uneasy. "Oh, the taxes." Margaret offered a sympathetic smile. "I'm afraid so. I came to remind you that the payment extension expires next week. After that, the property goes into review." Her tone was professional, but not unkind. "If you can't pay, there's an investor named Cole who's expressed interest. He's known for turning old sites into community lodges, but he'll only wait so long." Ethan watched her carefully. There was something honest about Margaret. She wasn't cruel, just a woman doing her duty in a system that had forgotten compassion. He noticed a thin silver ring on her right hand, worn smooth with time. She looked like someone who once believed in fairness, but had seen too much bureaucracy grind it away. "I understand," Mrs. Dawson said quietly. "Thank you for coming, Margaret. I'll try my best." Margaret nodded. "If you find any historical documents about this building, bring them to me. Sometimes heritage records can buy time." She glanced at Ethan. "You're new here?" "Just helping with repairs," Ethan replied, his voice even. She gave a small nod, then turned to Buddy and smiled. "Beautiful dog. Looks like he takes his job seriously." "He does," Ethan said. "Sometimes too seriously." When she left, the silence returned, heavier than before. Rain began again, tapping gently on the windows. Mrs. Dawson looked at the key still glinting on the counter. "I don't know what to do with any of this. It's been so long." Ethan studied the engraved letters. PH7. Could be coordinates or a code. Maybe connected to that spring he mentioned. She sighed. Thomas loved leaving puzzles. Said the world spoke to those patient enough to listen. Ethan leaned back, thoughtful. For the first time in months, he felt a purpose forming. A chance to fix something that mattered. Then maybe it's time someone listens again. Buddy rested his head on Ethan's boot, tail thumping once. Outside, the mist thickened, curling around the eaves like quiet breath, and beneath the floor, unnoticed by either of them, a faint sound echoed, a drip, slow and steady, as if the earth itself had begun to whisper back. The following morning brought a thin veil of fog that rolled over the hills like a restless tide. The sun had not yet burned through it, leaving the forest in shades of gray and pale green. Ethan adjusted the worn strap of his backpack and glanced down at Buddy, whose nose hovered just above the damp earth. The dog's tail wagged once before he began trotting ahead, following a trail invisible to anyone but him. Ethan's ribs still ached faintly from sleeping on the floor, but the pull of curiosity and duty pushed him forward. Inside his coat pocket, the brass key engraved with PH7 felt heavier than its size, as if carrying the echo of someone's unfinished work. He and Buddy followed the rough sketch from Thomas Dawson's letter. The path wound through pines and birches slick with dew, their bark cold and damp. The scent of moss and decaying leaves filled the air. Every few steps, Buddy stopped, ears pricked, sniffing. His fur, streaked in shades of sable and smoke, shimmered faintly whenever a weak beam of sunlight broke through the mist. Ethan walked carefully, his boots sinking slightly into the softened soil. He could almost hear his late platoon sergeant's voice in his head. "Watch your footing, Miller. The quiet's never as empty as it sounds." By noon, they reached the ridge where the forest opened into a small clearing. In the middle stood an old maple tree, its trunk wide and gnarled with age. The leaves, deep crimson and gold, rustled in the mild wind, scattering a few to the ground. Ethan paused to take in the sight. Something about the tree's quiet dignity made him feel small, but peaceful. Buddy circled it once, then twice, nose to the ground. The dog gave a short huff, then began to dig near the roots. "Easy, boy," Ethan said, crouching beside him. He brushed away the soil until his fingers hit something solid. A circular iron plate lay half buried, rusted but intact. When he wiped the dirt away, he saw faint letters etched into the metal. PH7, he exhaled slowly. "You really were onto something, old man," he murmured, thinking of Thomas Dawson. He tried to lift the plate, but it wouldn't budge. Buddy sat beside him, watching, panting softly. Ethan used a small crowbar from his pack to pry it loose. Beneath the plate was a narrow shaft of stone and a wooden box sealed with tar and linen. The air that escaped carried the faint scent of clay and old water. Inside the box lay an earthen teapot, its glaze cracked but intact, and a folded parchment wrapped in oilcloth. Ethan unrolled it carefully. The map depicted a network of blue inked lines snaking beneath the town, marked with circles and notes in neat handwriting. At the center was a label, Spring Line, source to Pine Haven Lake. Ethan traced the lines with his finger, feeling a quiet thrill of discovery. It wasn't just a spring. It was a forgotten system that once sustained the entire lakeside community. Perhaps, he thought, restoring. It could save the teahouse. Buddy barked once, as if agreeing. Before Ethan could study further, the wind picked up sharply. Dark clouds gathered overhead. The still air turned heavy with the smell of rain. He packed the map and teapot into his bag. The first thunderclap echoed through the valley just as the sky opened. Rain came hard and fast, drumming against the leaves. Ethan tugged his hood up and started down the slope. The ground turned slick within minutes. Buddy stayed close, ears flattened, moving with the grace of instinct. Halfway down, a patch of mud gave way beneath Ethan's boot. He slipped, tumbling down the incline, his body colliding with roots and rocks until he landed hard against a fallen log. A sharp pain shot through his side. He lay still, gasping, clutching his ribs. Buddy barked frantically, circling him, pressing his muzzle against Ethan's shoulder. "I'm fine," Ethan muttered, but his breath came shallow. The pain told him what he didn't want to admit. A cracked rib, maybe worse. Buddy barked again, louder this time, before darting off through the trees. The rain blurred everything, and Ethan's vision dimmed. He drifted in and out of awareness, the forest fading into gray sound. When he woke again, voices surrounded him. He was lying on a cot inside a small wooden cabin, the smell of pine resin and smoke filling his lungs. A man in his 50s sat near the hearth, stirring a pot of soup. He was tall and broad, with a weathered face and thick beard streaked white. His clothes, a plaid shirt and heavy denim overalls, smelled faintly of tobacco. His name was Harold Crane, a local woodworker who had found Ethan after Buddy led him to the slope. "Good to see you awake," Harold said in a deep voice that carried both authority and kindness. "That dog of yours wouldn't stop barking till I followed him. Found you half buried under the brush." Ethan tried to sit up, grimacing. "You the one who carried me here?" "Me and my boy, yeah." Harold nodded toward the corner. A young man of about 20 leaned against the wall, his frame lean and wiry, with sandy hair falling into his eyes. He wore a flannel jacket too big for him and had a shy smile. "Name's Caleb," Harold said. "He doesn't talk much, but he's got a good heart." Caleb waved awkwardly, then reached down to scratch Buddy behind the ears. The dog leaned into his touch immediately, tail sweeping the floor. "He's something else," Harold said, chuckling. "Smart as any man I've met. Must have saved your hide more than once." "He has," Ethan replied, voice hoarse. "Thank you for helping." "Don't mention it," Harold said. "We don't get many travelers out this way, but when one of our own's in trouble, we do what's right." Ethan's gaze drifted to the window, where the storm had passed, leaving streaks of light across the wet ground. He remembered the box, the map, the teapot, all still in his pack beside the cot. Relief washed through him when he saw the bag untouched. "You were clutching that thing like your life depended on it," Harold remarked. "Didn't have the heart to move it." "It might," Ethan said quietly. Harold raised an eyebrow, but didn't pry. "You're welcome to stay till you can breathe without wincing. My wife used to patch up worse, God rest her soul. I can do the basics." His voice softened at the mention of her. A flicker of grief passed through his eyes before he turned back to the fire. Ethan ate a small bowl of soup and listened to the crackling wood. Outside, the forest dripped with leftover rain. Caleb spoke up suddenly, his voice shy but sincere. "My granddad talked about springs like that one you found. Said the town was built on them." Ethan looked up sharply. "You've heard of the spring line?" Caleb nodded. "He used to say the water under Pine Haven wasn't just water. It was alive somehow. People used to come here to heal." Harold laughed softly. "Old stories, but maybe there's truth in them. Things don't survive this long without reason." Later, as the night deepened, Ethan sat awake beside Buddy, watching the firelight flicker across the floorboards. His ribs hurt, but something else stirred within him, hope mixed with responsibility. He reached out to rest a hand on Buddy's head. "We're going back, partner," he whispered. "We'll find what's left of that spring. For her. For him." Buddy blinked, then leaned against him, warm and solid as ever. The wind outside rustled through the pines, carrying with it the faint murmur of running water. The night fell sharp and heavy, rain threading down like wires over the rooftops of Pine Haven. The Dawson teahouse stood quiet against the lake, its windows dim, its sign creaking under gusts of wind. Inside, the fire had died to embers. Ethan sat at the corner table with Buddy lying at his feet, the dog's ears twitching with every sound that the storm carried. Ethan's ribs still ached from the fall a few days ago, wrapped in tight bandages that itched beneath his shirt. He stared at the folded map on the table, tracing the lines of the spring line with calloused fingers. Each mark, each note written by Thomas Dawson, seemed to whisper for him to keep going. But the ache in his body and the worry for Eleanor's failing health pressed hard against his resolve. Thunder rolled across the lake. Buddy lifted his head, eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. A low growl rose from his chest. Ethan frowned. "What is it, boy?" The dog stood, alert, his gaze fixed toward the back door that led out to the garden. Then the sound came, a faint scrape, metal against stone. Ethan grabbed the lantern and his old work jacket, wincing as he moved. When he stepped outside, rain stung his face and soaked through his collar. The garden behind the teahouse was small, bordered by a low stone wall and a patch of tall grass. He swung the lantern slowly. Its weak yellow glow caught something, a shadow bending near the ground. Ethan barely had time to shout before a figure rose suddenly and swung a blunt object. The blow struck his shoulder, and pain burst across his ribs. He fell to one knee, the lantern crashing into the mud. Buddy barked ferociously and lunged forward, teeth bared, but the figure kicked at him and fled toward the trees. The sound of boots splashing through puddles vanished into the storm. Ethan gasped, clutching his side, the rain washing over him. "Buddy," he hissed. The dog whined and returned to his side, licking the blood that trickled from a cut near Ethan's temple. "I'm fine," Ethan muttered, though his voice trembled. He looked down and saw the ground torn apart. Someone had been digging near the section of earth where the old pipes ran. The soil was freshly disturbed, the scent of clay and iron rising in the air. By morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the world cold and shining. The backyard looked like a battlefield. Mud churned, the ground broken open to reveal fragments of old ceramic pipe. Mrs. Dawson stood there wrapped in a wool shawl, her face pale. She bent to pick up one of the shards, tracing the blue glaze with her thin fingers. "Thomas made these by hand," she whispered. "He used to say the water would sing through them." Her eyes filled with tears. "Now look." Ethan leaned on the doorframe, bruised and exhausted. "I'll fix it," he said quietly. "Whoever did this won't get away with it." Before she could reply, a vehicle pulled up to the front of the shop. Two uniformed officers stepped out, followed by a woman in a gray overcoat. She was in her 40s, tall and sharp-featured, her auburn hair tied back in a low ponytail. Her name was Sheriff Linda Hayes, a well-respected figure in Pine Haven. She had a reputation for fairness and a mind like tempered steel. Her late husband had been a Marine, and ever since his passing, she carried a quiet empathy for veterans like Ethan, though she rarely showed it openly. "Mr. Miller," she said as she entered, her voice calm but firm. "We had a report of disturbance here last night. The neighbor, Mrs. Clifton, said she saw you running outside during the storm. Mind telling me what happened?" Ethan explained everything: the sound, the attack, the figure escaping into the trees. Hayes listened without interrupting, her eyes assessing. She crouched near the broken ground, lifting a piece of pipe between her gloved fingers. "Old ceramic. Expensive to replace." "Those were part of the original system," Ethan said. "Whoever did this knew where to dig." Hayes glanced at him. "And who would that be?" Ethan hesitated. "Maybe someone working for Cole. He's been trying to buy this property for months." Before Hayes could answer, the front door opened again. A man in a black wool coat stepped inside, closing his umbrella with practiced ease. He was tall, clean-shaven, with silver-streaked dark hair and a confident posture that belonged to someone used to being obeyed. His name was Cole Whitmore, a developer known across the county for turning forgotten places into profitable ventures. His dark eyes flicked from Hayes to Ethan, then to the broken floor outside. "What a shame," Cole said smoothly. "I heard about the incident and came to check on Mrs. Dawson. I do hope no one was hurt." Eleanor's expression tightened. "You have some nerve coming here." Now," Cole replied, spreading his hands. "I only want what's best for Pine Haven. If old structures start collapsing, they become a hazard. Perhaps this is a sign it's time to let go, Mrs. Dawson." Ethan stepped forward, anger rising. "You sent someone to dig here, didn't you?" Cole's smile didn't falter. "That's a serious accusation from a man who's barely been in town a month. Maybe you're the one who broke it, trying to prove your story about Hidden Springs." Hayes raised a hand, cutting the tension. "Enough. Mr. Cole, you'll leave the investigation to my office. Mr. Miller, I'm afraid you'll need to come with me until we get statements sorted." Ethan stiffened, but didn't resist. "You really think I'd destroy the one thing keeping this place alive?" Hayes' expression softened slightly. "I didn't say that, but I need to be thorough." At the station, the questioning lasted for hours. Ethan explained the letter, the map, the discovery of the spring. Hayes listened, jotting notes. Buddy sat outside the office window, visible even in the rain, waiting. When Hayes finally returned, she handed him a towel and a cup of coffee. "You're free to go," she said. "No charges, but you've made enemies, Mr. Miller. Watch yourself." Back at the teahouse, the lights were off except for the lamp by the counter. Mrs. Dawson sat quietly with Buddy at her feet. She looked up as Ethan entered. "They think you did it?" Some do, he said. And now no one wants to hire me for repair work. Word spreads fast in small towns. Her eyes filled with sorrow. I'm sorry, Ethan. You don't deserve that. He shrugged, though his chest ached. Doesn't matter. I'll be gone soon anyway. No, her voice was firm despite its fragility. Don't you see? You were meant to find that letter, that spring. If you leave now, this place dies with it. Ethan met her gaze. In the dim light, her face looked both old and strong, like a lantern that refused to go out. He felt something shift inside him, a spark of the soldier who once refused to abandon his post. All right, he said quietly. One more chance. For the teahouse. Buddy raised his head, tail wagging once as if sealing the promise. Outside, the cold wind howled through the dark streets of Pine Haven, but inside the small shop, a faint warmth returned, fragile yet unyielding. The following dawn came gray and brittle, the frost still clinging to the fields beyond Pine Haven. The lake lay silent under a thin veil of mist, reflecting the pale light of a cold morning. Inside the Dawson tea house, the air smelled faintly of wet wood and yesterday's fire. Ethan sat alone by the window, nursing a dull ache in his ribs. The town had turned quiet toward him since the night of the attack. Whispers in the market, doors that closed a little faster when he walked by. Only Buddy remained steadfast, never leaving his side, watching every move with steady amber eyes. Mrs. Dawson, though weakened by her illness, tried to keep the shop running. She often sat behind the counter now, her hands trembling as she polished old teacups. Ethan noticed her breath was shorter each day. That morning, as he stacked firewood, she approached with a small envelope. It's from the bank, she said, voice heavy. Final notice. Her eyes glistened, and for a moment she looked far older than her years. Ethan took the letter, jaw tightening. Then we don't have much time. He looked toward Buddy, who lifted his head as if he understood. We'll find the spring, Ethan said quietly. That water's the only proof left that this place matters. Hours later, he packed a few tools into his rucksack, an old shovel, a rusted crowbar, a coil of rope, and set out with Buddy toward the woods behind the town. The map Thomas Dawson had drawn was nearly unreadable in places. The ink faded by time. But Ethan had memorized every curve and mark. He traced the route leading north, where the line marked secondary flow, crossed beneath a small ridge. The path took them past frozen fields and through stretches of pine forest that glowed blue in the winter light. They reached the ridge near midday. The earth there was hard and half frozen, but Buddy seemed to sense something beneath it. He paced back and forth, nose to the ground, tail stiff. Then he stopped, pawing at one patch of soil where faint warmth rose through the frost. Steam curled up as if the ground itself were breathing. Ethan knelt, pressing his palm flat against the dirt. You feel that, boy? Buddy barked once in response. The veteran smiled faintly. All right, let's see what you've got for us. He began to dig. The ground was stubborn, each handful of earth freezing his fingers until his knuckles bled. His breath fogged in front of him, and every movement sent pain through his ribs. But he kept going, Buddy digging beside him, paws flinging clumps of clay aside. After nearly an hour, the shovel hit something that echoed, a hollow thud. Ethan cleared the remaining soil with his hands, revealing the top of a cracked stone conduit. Warm air drifted out through a fracture in its side, carrying a faint, metallic scent. Water. He widened the hole carefully, using the crowbar to lift a broken section of the stone. A small stream burst free, running clear and cold over his fingers. He laughed softly, breath catching in his throat. "There you are." Buddy barked, circling the hole, tail wagging furiously. The sound of running water grew, mixing with the wind and the whisper of the pines. Ethan sat back, exhausted. Mud smeared across his coat and face. For a long time, he just listened. The sound was soft but steady, like a heartbeat under the earth. When they returned to the tea house, night had already settled. Ethan carried a jug filled with the newly uncovered spring water. Mrs. Dawson looked up as he entered, eyes wide. "You found it?" she asked, disbelief trembling in her voice. He nodded, setting the jug on the counter. "It's warm, clean, alive. It's still there, Eleanor." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thomas used to say that water remembers the hands that set it free." She smiled faintly. "Maybe it remembered yours." Ethan prepared the kettle himself that night. He poured the clear water into the old pot and added a pinch of dried tea leaves from the jar labeled Dawson's Blend. As it began to boil, a thin curl of steam rose, carrying a scent that neither of them had smelled in years. Mint, honey, and something unnameable, a freshness that seemed to reach through time. Mrs. Dawson closed her eyes. "That smell," she whispered. "It's him. It's Thomas." Ethan watched the steam swirl toward the ceiling, its tendrils catching the lamplight like silver threads. For a moment, he felt as if the whole room exhaled. He filled 2 cups and set one before her. They drank in silence. The flavor was clean, bright, and cool, lingering in the throat with a note of sweetness that felt almost alive. Buddy lay near the hearth, head resting on his paws. The firelight flickered over his fur, and in the stillness, he gave a low, contented sigh. After a while, Ethan spoke softly. "You think people would taste it? Would they know the difference?" Mrs. Dawson smiled. "They'd know. Not in their tongues, maybe, but in their hearts. This water carries memory, Ethan. When people drink it, they remember what peace tastes like." Ethan leaned back, the warmth of the cup seeping into his palms. For the first time since returning from the war, he felt still inside. No noise, no ghosts, only the steady hum of the kettle and the quiet breath of the dog at his feet. Outside, the rain began again, softer this time, tapping gently on the roof. He looked out through the window and saw ripples spreading across the puddles, the reflection of the lantern light dancing on the wet ground. He thought of the spring under the earth, of water moving unseen through stone and soil, never gone, only waiting to be heard again. That night, long after Mrs. Dawson went to bed, Ethan remained awake at the counter. He ran his fingers over the map, tracing the spring's route toward the lake. His mind was already turning. How to rebuild the old pipes, how to prove the water's value, how to make the town listen. Buddy lifted his head and watched him, eyes half-lidded, tail tapping lightly against the floor. Ethan reached down, scratching the dog behind the ears. "We're not done yet, partner. Tomorrow, we make them hear it." The kettle hissed softly behind him, as if agreeing. And somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, faint and rhythmic, came the sound of trickling water, steady, sure, alive. The sun rose clear over Pine Haven for the first time in weeks. The rain had washed the streets clean, leaving a mirror sheen on the cobblestones. Ethan stood outside the Dawson tea house, straightening the hand-painted sign that now read, "Tea Tasting Day, a gift from the spring." His hands were rough and nicked from days of work, but his eyes held a steadiness that hadn't been there before. Behind him, Buddy sat by the door, tail sweeping the step like a metronome of calm. The dog's fur gleamed in the morning light, and his gaze followed every passerby with quiet alertness. Inside, Mrs. Dawson was setting out cups and trays, moving slower than she used to, but refusing to rest. The smell of polished wood and steeping tea filled the room. "I still can't believe you convinced them," she said softly. "Half the town used to cross the street just to avoid you." Ethan smiled faintly. "People change their minds when they can taste the truth." By noon, the townsfolk began to gather. There were farmers in worn jackets, young mothers pushing strollers, and old veterans leaning on canes. Even Sheriff Linda Hayes was there, her gray coat buttoned to the neck, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd. She gave Ethan a nod, quiet approval, the kind that meant more than words. Ethan had arranged 2 large kettles on separate tables. The first was filled with water from the newly uncovered spring. The second, with regular tap water from the town supply. Each had a label, but no explanation. Margaret Finch, from the town records office, arrived to help pour and record votes. Today she wore a wool scarf that brought warmth to her serious face. Her chestnut hair had loosened from its usual bun, and a hint of fatigue softened her eyes. "You sure about this?" she asked under her breath. "Cole won't like being embarrassed in public." Ethan shrugged. "He's had his say. Now it's time the water speaks for itself." As the tasting began, murmurs filled the air. People sipped from each cup, comparing, frowning, then sipping again. For a while, no one spoke. Then an old man near the front, a retired railway worker named Mr. Harlan, his hands bent and scarred from years of labor, set his cup down and whispered, "This one, it tastes like my grandmother's kitchen." Others nodded, echoing his surprise. "It's clean," one woman said, "soft somehow." Soon the crowd grew still, the air filled with the subtle fragrance of mint and honey rising from the spring water brew. Even the skeptical younger residents stood quietly, their faces softened by nostalgia they couldn't quite explain. Ethan watched them, feeling the tension in his chest ease for the first time in months. Margaret raised her clipboard. "All right," she said. "By a clear majority, the town prefers the spring water tea." The crowd broke into applause. Buddy barked once, tail thumping the floor, as if adding his own vote. Mrs. Dawson wiped her eyes discreetly. "Thomas would have loved this," she whispered. But the celebration didn't last long. That evening, as lanterns glowed along the lake, flyers began to appear on shop windows and street corners. The bold black print read, "Warning, unsafe water detected near old Dawson site." Beneath it was the seal of Cole Whitmore's development company. Ethan found one pinned to the teahouse door. He tore it down, anger burning through his chest. Within hours, fear began to ripple through Pine Haven. Some refused to drink the tea again, worried about contamination. Others whispered that the spring might be toxic. Even the laughter from earlier faded into doubt. The next morning, Sheriff Hayes arrived with her deputy, a lean man named Ray Collins, whose narrow face and restless eyes made him look perpetually skeptical. He was new in town, recently transferred from Burlington after a scandal involving a falsified report. Hayes had vouched for him despite his reputation. Now he stood near the counter, tapping his pen against his notebook, impatient. "Ray, stop that," Hayes said. "You're making the dog nervous." Buddy growled softly, his amber eyes fixed on the deputy. Hayes turned to Ethan. "Cole's filed a complaint. Says the spring might be leaking chemicals from old construction waste buried near the lake. I told him I'd run tests before making any statement." Ethan crossed his arms. "He's lying. There's nothing wrong with that water." "I believe you," Hayes said, "but I need proof." Ethan glanced at Buddy. "Then let's find it." They spent the afternoon by the lakeshore, collecting samples from the spring outlet and nearby soil. Margaret came along, helping label the jars. Her calm presence steadied Ethan's frustration. "He's trying to scare people into selling," she said. "That's his game." Hayes nodded grimly. "Cole's clever. He knows fear moves faster than truth." The results came back 2 days later. The water was perfectly clean. No chemicals, no runoff, no contamination. The report was signed by Dr. Samuel Wright, a local environmental scientist in his late 50s, who had lived near Pine Haven all his life. Dr. Wright was a stout man with gray hair that stuck out in unruly wisps, and a pair of thick glasses perched crookedly on his nose. He spoke with the slow patience of someone who believed science should always be explained in plain language. "I don't know what that Whitmore fella's playing at," Wright said during the town meeting that followed. "But your water's purer than most bottled brands. Whoever dug up those old pipes did it out of spite, not safety." The crowd murmured, turning their eyes toward Cole, who stood near the back of the hall in his immaculate coat. He smiled thinly, though the color in his cheeks had drained. Sheriff Hayes stepped forward. "My office found boot prints behind the teahouse that matched the size and tread of shoes issued to Whitmore's contracted crew. We also recovered a tool handle with their company's initials burned into it." The room erupted in whispers. Cole's composure cracked for the first time. "This is absurd. You can't prove anything." Hayes folded her arms. "I can, and I will." Ethan stayed silent, watching as the tide of opinion shifted again. People who had once doubted him now looked at him differently, not as a drifter, but as someone who had fought for the town's truth. That evening, when the meeting ended, Margaret stopped by the tea house. The lamps were lit again, and the familiar smell of mint tea drifted through the air. "Looks like you won," she said softly. Ethan poured her a cup. "It's not about winning. It's about keeping something real." She smiled. "You and that dog might just save this town yet." But he lifted his head, tail wagging lazily. Outside, the lake shimmered in moonlight, and from somewhere beneath the earth came the faint, eternal murmur of the spring, clear, alive, and unbroken. Snow returned to Pine Haven in slow, deliberate drifts, blanketing the rooftops and softening the edges of the town. The Dawson Tea House stood like a quiet memory by the lake, its chimney puffing pale smoke into the gray sky. Inside, the scent of pine logs mixed with mint tea, wrapping the room in gentle warmth. Ethan sat by the counter, his face drawn and weary, the bank's letter spread before him. The words were cold and final, foreclosure due in 10 days. Across from him, Mrs. Dawson rested under a wool blanket near the fire. She had only just returned from the hospital, her skin thin and pale as parchment, her hands trembling when she lifted her cup. Buddy lay by her feet, his fur glowing gold and silver in the firelight. His breath came slow and steady, his eyes watchful. The dog was 7 years old now, strong but calm, carrying the dignity of a creature who had seen both chaos and peace. When Eleanor coughed, he nudged her ankle gently, as if reminding her that she was not alone. Ethan folded the letter and stared at the flames. The orange light flickered across his weathered face, casting deep shadows under his eyes. He had fought wars, rebuilt towns, and survived hunger. But this, losing the tea house, felt heavier than any battlefield. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was memory, belonging, a heartbeat in a quiet town that had forgotten how to hope. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the smell of frozen earth. Then, sometime after midnight, came a knock. Ethan hesitated before opening the door. Standing in the snow was Sheriff Linda Hayes, wrapped in her thick gray coat, her auburn hair dusted white. Her cheeks were red from the cold, but her eyes shone with quiet determination. Behind her were 3 townspeople: Margaret Finch from the record office, old Mr. Harlan, the retired railway worker, and young Ella Cooper, a teacher in her late 20s with bright green eyes and chestnut curls tucked under a knitted hat. Ella stepped forward, holding a lantern that glowed gold in the snow. "We heard about the bank notice," she said softly. "You helped us when no one else would. Now it's our turn." Ethan blinked, unsure. "You don't have to." But Margaret interrupted, her tone brisk. "We're not here for thanks. We're here to keep this place standing." By morning, the news had spread through the town like fire through dry pine. One by one, people came: farmers with lumber, fishermen with rope, mechanics with tools. Even children carried small boxes of nails or paintbrushes. The air filled with the sound of hammers, laughter, and boots crunching in snow. Buddy trotted between them, tail high, inspecting each worker as if supervising the repairs. Eleanor watched from her chair by the window, tears welling in her eyes. "Thomas always said this house belonged to everyone," she whispered. "I never believed it until now." Ethan worked alongside them, climbing ladders despite his injured ribs. His breath clouded the air, his fingers numb, but he felt a strange warmth spreading through him. The warmth of purpose, of being part of something greater than himself. He saw Margaret directing volunteers, Hayes securing beams with quiet precision, Ella painting the window frame sky blue while humming a Christmas hymn. When dusk fell, the tea house gleamed again, its porch newly painted and its sign shining proudly. The Dawson Tea House. Tea for veterans, every Thursday. Beneath it, someone had added in chalk, "A place to remember." As the volunteers began to leave, a black sedan pulled up by the frozen path. Ethan turned, his muscles tensing. From the car stepped Cole Whitmore, dressed not in his usual tailored coat, but in a simple wool overcoat, his silver-streaked hair uncovered, snow melting on his shoulders. His face was different this time, less polished, more human. The crowd quieted. Cole looked around at the repaired porch, the new sign, the lanterns glowing in the windows. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he walked up to Ethan, his boots crunching in the snow. "You did this," he said quietly. Ethan shook his head. "They did. The town did." Cole looked down at Buddy, who stood beside Ethan, tail flicking once before settling again. The developer exhaled slowly. "My father served in Korea," he began. "When he came home, he barely spoke. The only place he ever went willingly was here. He used to sit right by that corner table." Cole pointed toward the back, where a small round table stood beneath the window. Said the tea helped him remember who he was before the war. Eleanor stirred in her chair, her frail voice breaking the silence. I remember him. Always polite. Always brought your mother's apple jam. Cole smiled faintly, his eyes misting. He used to say that kindness was the only thing that made the noise stop. He turned back to Ethan. I thought building something new would honor that memory. But I see now, I was wrong. He reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. I've withdrawn the project. The funds set aside for development, about $70,000. I'm donating them to restore the lakeside pier. And he hesitated, glancing at the window where the townsfolk stood listening. If you'll allow it, I'd like to sponsor one table here. A place for anyone who doesn't want to talk, but just wants to sit and listen. My father called it the silent table. The room fell still. Hayes was the first to nod. That sounds like something this town could use. Ethan looked at the crowd, then back at Cole. You're welcome here, he said simply. Cole smiled, the kind of smile that carried years of regret. Thank you, Mr. Miller. As night settled, the townspeople lit lanterns along the porch. Their glow reflected off the snow, turning the tea house into a beacon of gold and warmth. Buddy lay near the fire, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. The murmur of voices filled the room, veterans sharing stories, children laughing, the kettle singing softly on the stove. Ethan sat near the window, watching the snow fall. For the first time in a long while, he felt something beyond survival. It was peace, the kind born not from solitude but from shared hands and open hearts. He reached down to scratch Buddy's neck. We did it, boy, he whispered. Together. Buddy lifted his head and gave a low, contented bark. The lanterns outside flickered as if in agreement, their lights swaying gently against the winter wind. Spring returned to Pine Haven gently, as if the town itself was exhaling after a long, held breath. Snow melted into silver rivulets that trickled down the hills, feeding the lake until it shimmered once again under the soft April sun. Birds nested in the maple trees near the Dawson tea house, and their songs mixed with the hum of the kettle that now never seemed to stop singing. The building, once on the edge of ruin, stood proudly restored, its white walls freshly painted, its porch draped with hanging flower baskets, and the old wooden sign burnished by countless hands. Ethan Miller had changed, too. His once worn face now carried a quiet confidence. The lines on his brow still spoke of struggle, but his eyes, those calm, gray-blue eyes, had softened into something peaceful. He was no longer just a veteran drifting through towns. He had become part of this one. He wore his flannel shirt rolled up to the elbows, sleeves spotted with tea stains and sawdust, a symbol of labor and belonging. Buddy followed him everywhere, the 7-year-old German shepherd's gait still strong, his sable coat gleaming in the morning light. The dog had grown into more than a companion. He was a silent guardian of the house, of its memories, of its songs. On the first Thursday of every month, the bell above the door would ring 3 times, a ritual now affectionately called the silent hour. Veterans, widows, and wanderers gathered at the long oak table in the center of the room. There they sat without many words, listening to the soft whistle of the kettle and the crackle of firewood. Some days laughter filled the room, other days quiet tears did, but always peace remained. Mrs. Eleanor Dawson, though frail, was still very much the heart of the house. Her silver hair was always pinned neatly behind her head, her smile patient and knowing. She called herself a consultant, though everyone knew she was the soul that kept the place gentle. She spent her afternoons writing letters to veterans across the state, inviting them to visit and let the water heal what time forgot. One mild afternoon, as sunlight poured through the windows, the town gathered outside for a small ceremony. Sheriff Linda Hayes stood beside a wooden podium, her gray coat replaced by a tailored Navy uniform, her auburn hair swept neatly under her cap. Next to her was Mayor Gregory Latham, a stout man in his 50s with kind eyes and a voice that carried warmth. The mayor read aloud the town's proclamation. By the vote of Pine Haven's council, the Dawson Teahouse is hereby declared a community heritage landmark, preserving not only the craft of tea, but the spirit of healing it has brought to our people. Applause rippled through the crowd. Ethan looked at Eleanor, who wiped a tear with her handkerchief. Beside him, Buddy barked once, as if marking the moment. After the ceremony, Ethan walked to the lakeshore. The water was still, reflecting clouds that drifted lazily overhead. He crouched down, running his hand through the cool current that flowed from the spring he and Buddy had uncovered months ago. It hummed softly beneath his palm, the same low resonance he had once mistaken for wind. "You remember," he whispered, smiling faintly. Behind him came the sound of footsteps on the dock. It was Ella Cooper, the young teacher who had helped repaint the windows. Her green eyes were bright against the blue sky, and her hands carried 2 steaming cups of tea. "You've been out here a while," she said. "Thought you might need this." Ethan accepted the cup with a nod. "Old habits. The Army teaches you to check the perimeter even when there's peace." She laughed gently. "Maybe peace just takes practice." She glanced at Buddy, who had settled beside them, his head resting on his paws. "He looks like he knows something we don't." Ethan smiled. "He usually does." They stood in silence for a moment, sipping tea, listening to the rhythmic lap of water. Then, as if on cue, a faint chime rang from the porch behind them. 3 delicate notes from the shell wind bell that Cole Whitmore had commissioned months ago. Ethan turned toward the sound. Inside, the kettle had begun to whistle, steady and strong. Buddy lifted his head, ears pricking, eyes fixed on the horizon. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, framed by the soft afternoon light. "He's hearing it again," she said softly. "Thomas used to say the spring sings when hearts are light." Ethan nodded. "Then it's a good day for music." Later that evening, as dusk painted the lake in hues of gold and lavender, people gathered inside the teahouse. The fire crackled, and the smell of mint and honey filled the air. On the long oak table lay a new addition, a small brass plaque engraved with the words, "The Silent Table." For those who listen. Cole's idea had become a symbol of unity. Even he visited sometimes, sitting quietly by the window, his sharpness replaced by gratitude. As the crowd thinned, Ethan poured 2 cups of tea, one for himself and one for the empty chair across the table, the seat that had once belonged to Thomas Dawson. He spoke quietly, though no one else was near. "You kept your promise, old friend. The water found its way again." Buddy rested at his feet, tail curling around his legs. Outside, the lake glimmered with the reflection of the lanterns, and the faint mist that rose from it looked almost like breath, alive, remembering. Ethan reached down, brushing his hand through Buddy's fur. "We'll keep it safe, partner," he said softly, "for everyone who comes after." As the night deepened, The last thing he heard was the whistle of the kettle and the gentle ring of 3 wind chimes outside. Steady, familiar, and kind. And though the air grew cool, warmth lingered in every corner of the house, in every drop of tea poured that night. The Dawson tea house had become more than a building. It was a sanctuary, a living memory woven from steam, laughter, and silence. And for Ethan Miller, a man who once wandered lost through storms, it had become home. In the quiet lakeside town of Pine Haven, a weary veteran named Ethan Miller and his loyal German shepherd, Buddy, discovered that healing can begin with something as simple as a cup of tea. Through struggle, loss, and the kindness of strangers, they restored not only an old tea house, but the very heart of their community. What began as a forgotten place became a home for those who needed peace, a refuge where silence could speak, and water itself seemed to carry memories of grace. This story reminds us that miracles don't always arrive as thunder or lightning. Sometimes they come in the warmth of helping hands, in forgiveness shared, or in the quiet faith that God is still whispering through the ordinary. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to Story of Life for more tales of hope and redemption. May God bless you, guide your steps, and let His peace flow through your life, like water that never forgets its way.